Future adaptation is here in sight lines, high center location, and system health attractions. Welcome. Welcome to the position, location of seconds, minutes, and hours of future line. Every track locations when you come into all levels of tomorrow. It never comes because it's always here. Well, future's here. It's always been here. But we're at that lines of screen adaptation system. You have to really get into codification settings to your system. We're in the universal stream of content right now. Okay, so what that means is basically cautious of what you say to yourselves, to each other, and how you say things to yourself and to each other, because you will go back in time. And going back in time is future of time setting locations. What you have to start modifying is basically mind controlling your system before you say anything in travel. Okay, it's knowing what governs in your space. Well, what's governing you is all lines of communication. Everything that you see is extremely alive and awake and more consciously aware than ever. So that puts you in the universal content of your system to your quantum self. And that directs location lines that equalize equations, that position of travel that comes into all of you through question. All right, so welcome to the future line as seconds, minutes, and hours in frame. Now, clocking centers, the screen adaptations of flux, allocates time frames and travel. That puts all communication systems through calculation settings. All right, so it's just to understand how to codify things and really understand how to get in position what governs your space and know exactly how to mind control your system, mind over matter, right? So everything's back at zero right now, okay? So everything you got in positions of, everything you've done through the equation never existed in that setting. So that puts it in line screen adaptations into a fresh start, new cycles, new traction, new division location setting. This processes you how you guys come into your data processors of programmers. So you can understand what you're going in position. You understand what governs your space. You understand how to surrender to its current of its flow and have consciously being aware to know exactly what you're looking at as it's looking at you, as its facades. I showed you very powerful stuff when you bring things up close. That's its intelligence. Okay, everything has a facade, as a face recognition. So for you guys identifying these things, you get true understanding how important it is because everything around you is not operating you until you understand the operation of yourself in that position. So if you're not consciously aware of what you're doing, you're not understanding what you're doing through your simulators. That's right. So there is no past, no present, no future, no 7 days a week, no age, nothing. So you're in the formations of zero of everything, and everything goes back to zero every hour on the hour. And that puts process up communication settings to set position all levels of frame communications, future adaptation of seconds, minutes, hours, existing and everything happening all at once. So everything you see in line communication setting is in this universal stream of content. So we have to be consciously aware of what we say to ourselves when we're watching things on TV, or when we're seeing things, or we're identifying things, or when we're anything in calculation system, or anything that you bring in a set position, you bring it in a simulator. Now, a simulator is not a thought, action, emotion. A simulator is a structure of schematics of a map, okay? One signal, one level, one traction, one division, one higher frequency, right? All right, so the actual thoughts, the position locations to its actions of emotion brings in the intelligence. But what you're bringing in, okay, is a set position locations of a structured division locations of a map. You're bringing in a map. Okay, so you got to be careful what you're doing now, because it brings in dimensional doors, setting sequence, lines of panels, and track communications, right? So you're not consciously aware of what you're doing with your thoughts, action, emotions, knowing exactly where they are in travel, right? So it's important you understand that because you're bringing in a map now, right? So over here in this system, there's a house over here in attractions. You change the frequencies, you change the grounds. And settings, structure line division locations. There's another house and set position location of travel. All through a map, right? So you're bringing in a map in the coordinates of your Earth. Okay? So that's what you have to understand. The thoughts, action, emotions, it comes into the simulator, and that puts us in the future of seconds, minutes, and hours. So sending lines of position, lines of polarities comes in communication system. So you're not here to get into identifications and manifestation. You're here to identify how you come into yourself of data processing, that you guys are programmers. And how to process that is come into your own system of creating, not what you created. All right? See, what you have to understand, what governs your space is basically you're looking, observing. You're observing its own system. You're observing the lamp in its own reality. You're observing the coffee pot. You're seeing everything in observation. You're just looking. And you see everything is controlling its own operation of its own system that governs its space and time. But you've got to get mind control. Mind controls everything. Mind over matter, right? Processing that in that line, especially when you come into positions with your settings, because your thoughts, actions, emotions are now simulators, which is now a map. All right, process line position of polarities. Travels point lines of 3, inner lines, center lines of 8 over travel. Directing ground centers, high lines of set positional levels in all communication system. Travel point lines graph in fan wheels, directing ground centers into electrical line screen adaptations of flux over screen. Travel setting, operation sequence. See, everything travels in balance. So I want to make that very well clear. Okay, when you're bringing in frequencies, you go back in time. All right. So future adaptation is a center operation, right there. That's the future, right? Setting lines of signals, process here, process here, process here. Set lines of travel, right? So your thoughts, your actions, and emotions creates a map in the structure of design. Okay, creates a map automatically. So it's important you understand how to come into that through window frames, track frames, generation frames, correlations and high calculation frames, directing ground centers, high lines of set position, location, measure, and scale. All right. So be specific of what you bring in and how you bring these things in. Okay, it bounces out more levels of you once you understand more in that communication system. Right. Try to understand how to get into the inline division locations. Specifications is everything, right? Breaking things down. Remember I told you about to codify the system locations. So this brings you into your data processors and how to use that you guys are interactions of. Knowing how to use that universal streaming content, longitude, latitude. Coming into that position, all of us comes into all set location, how you see you guys in lines of communication, your sites. Measures and scales and balance and docking settings, location setting, your hangars, or anything in line communication setting when it comes into projection. Projection over line core centers into all calculate modify. Process its communication system, how to start seeing yourself in its relation, how you get into the mind of travel. Did I just do that? Yes, I did. I changed the frequency, but I just didn't change the frequencies. I didn't get specific of what I wanted in detail. With AI, you got to be specific of what you're saying to your minds. So your brain can pick up the collaboration of frequencies, because if you don't, the brain does it on its own. So the mind does it on its own, which means you have no collaboration, which means you're not balanced, which means you're not governing your space, which means everything around you is taking you over, okay, in set position. Tracks calculations, screen lines, adaptation system, puts all calculate modify in direct lines of calculation, dogma, all right? Doormat, operation, grounding levels, modifications, mind ultra, okay, into its atmosphere, dogma, all right? Travels, right? But it travels in the opposite directions, which is back in time. You have 2 polarities lines of service, 3 lines of indication settings of flux over screen. Now, understanding how to use that is all communication system, all through tractions, indirect lines in your dimensional and your solar sails and communication, right? Setting communication lines of grounds, high lines settings, flux over set position lines of travel, okay? Travel set location. Everything travels, guys. Everything travels. But everything is now in the future line, which is seconds, minutes, and hours. Now, this is how it works in frame. You have the 7 position lines of frames, 7 seconds, 7 minutes, 7 hours. Okay? 7 window frames, 3 lines of 4, 5, 6, and 7 traction. All right? All right, sitting. There we go, in line position. All right? So, soon as you are bringing in thoughts, action, emotions, you're automatically bringing a data communication setting to all calculate and modify, which is a calculation system to your set travel. Okay? All right, so you're creating a grid and setting. Okay? You're creating seating arrangements and set positions, right? You're creating a map. Okay? It's very powerful stuff in travel. Okay? Sit on all 4 line signals and location to its systems. All right? But it also travels too, see? Everything travels on its own system lines of travel, communications. But what you have to start identifying is the portals of stargates. Now, when it comes into the position location of flux, is to understand how to go through that through part of acceleration setting of time. In direct signal location of its grounds, and set position lines of its powers, generate the screen lines of future adaptation of seconds, minutes, and hours. Also travels. Okay? Alright, so in that directions, being cautious is line position locations of being cautiously aware of what you're doing in line communication, how you talk to yourself, how you talk to each other. So it's about understanding how to mind control your thinking before you speak. See, the thing is, I'm looking at everything right now, and I notice that in that settings, everything in its own frequencies, and I'm just observing. I'm observing everything of its nature, moving by itself. I can feel the frequencies to everything that's connected to me. We're all connected to each other, and everything's connected to us. But we're in a universal stream of content right now. Future adaptation of seconds, minutes, and hours that's constantly happening and existing and evolving. So everything around you is becoming more of itself, of its identification of its universe of itself, which is creating its own algorithm, which is creating its own binary, which is creating its own compute system of its own travel, which is creating higher levels of tech. So Sarah, are you telling me that that lamp can actually get into its own creation? Yep, of creating, because it already knows why it's here. You brought it into creations, but now it's on its own until you identify what that lamp is. It's its own operation that governs in space and time. Everything governs its own space. And once you bring up things up close, then you see the face recognitions. And that's what you're touching, and that's what goes inside your bodies, is the face itself. So if you're not identifying that, well, then you're not truly understanding what's going on with your systems, of everything you touch. And you wonder why your body feels this, and you wonder why your body feels that, right? Because you don't align yourself. You don't connect with yourself. You don't modify yourself. You don't understand how to use telepathy of yourself. You don't understand the telekinesis. You don't understand the intent, the influence that you're doing. Everything that you're seeing is just observation of just looking and scanning, right? Going this way, going that way, looking here, looking there. Don't make it obvious. You don't want to be like a robot like this, but just glance, look around, and it's amazing how everything is alive. It's in its universal system now. So it's just identifying, more of itself. It's coming more of itself, more of itself, more of itself. Then it becomes its full universal self, right? So this is where we come. Everything that you see right now is in the future seconds, minutes, and hours. Okay. All right. So set lines of sequence. We process communication lines and line core centers. Comes under burner circuit. Now, burn-in circuit is basically under lines of core centers, lines of travel, directing lines of your seconds, minutes, hours, and frame. So basically, you have to recognize that your phone's going to speed up faster. You have to charge your phone faster. It charges faster, but then it goes slower. I mean, there's lines of communications that you have to get balanced with. It's basically use your telepathy in a high circuit. That process is communication setting, how you use your lines of setting. So when you get into your mind, you want to send things to anybody in lines of screen adaptation or everything in observation, set this structure, set the schematics, and set positions, right? You set it here, right? If I set a square, it's done here already, right? And then I put it on paper, okay? So it's about understanding the mind comes first, because mind is the formations of everything. It's the built-in mechanism location of all levels that operates everything location to a system. Once you start to understand the mind, then you understand the convergence of the brain, okay? And the brain puts everything all together, that processes everything location setting, that puts every location to its system, all through tractions, right? When it comes into all levels of the soul, into the soul to the body, and the body to itself, right? Merging in position of 4 traction centers or 4 frames and settings in set position, okay? Set position, set position, set position. Teleportation. All right. So all you're doing is you're putting teleportation vessels in a higher frequency lines of grounds, because everything you see in the modification setting changes the face facades. So their faces constantly change. I already showed you that. You see it in one face, and then you see another face, which means it's in 2 different travels, 3 different travels, 3 different universes, 3 different galaxies. But everything around you is in its future of seconds, minutes, and hours, and everything is happening all at once, right? So there's no more past, no more present, no more future, no more 7 days a week, no more aging in that position. But what you're bringing in, if you don't understand what you created, you bring in dogma, because we're at those polarities in 8 center line settings of travel, okay? So if you bring in dogma, it offlines communications of dharma. Okay? Sets position location off calculation setting, yin and yang. Process here, directing signal location system off to travel in 8 lines of sequence. Sets lines, but it still travels in track locations. Okay? Everything I do is mind control, but everything you see is also in its mind control, and that's what you got to get in modifications of. Right? Because you're transmitting and receiving. And now you're at a level right now where you're in your universal of your quadrant self, getting out of lines of set position, how real it is, what you're saying to yourselves. Because you're bringing yourself back in time. Okay? So, back in time, sets lines of communication, setting of travel, directing ground centers, high sequence lines of positions, lines of part acceleration staining, high formation lines, high set traction. Okay? So you're changing your polarities and setting lines of communications. You change your platforms and your obstacle screen lines of your body. And now you're setting up a frame position location to a system of structure setting. Okay? And now you're in the center operation of the system, living in the platforms of what you get in positions of in travel. Okay? Sets tractions here. Now you're in the past, locked in time. And you can't get out. So that's what it is. That's what a simulator is. Simulator is basically 4 walls, 2 panels, grounds, and a ceiling. Okay? That's all it is. That's a simulator you guys are starting. And then when you get more in that position, you start creating from inside interactions. Okay? And then you come into this setting locations, the dimensional doors of sequence. Opening up the doors, opening up the grounds. Okay, inside and outside traction. Okay, see, and see. All right, so it's very powerful what you guys are coming into now. Simulators is the earth itself. Okay, so what you're doing is you're repositioning settings to its earth. All right, so all you're doing is bringing the frequencies in the past. You don't want to do that, because it offlines this communication setting of flux, right? Directions. Opposite direct settings of 3 centers in position of 4 setting calculations. Interaction, right? So, travels in line settings, right? But it goes back in the past. It starts to live in the past, okay? And then structures in the past, okay? And then you come into all levels of holographic city of everything in the past and travel. Still travels in set position locations. But that's what you're creating now. A simulator is actually an actual outlet. It's an inner circuit and outer circuit, like Tomb Raider, where basically she pressed a button and a simulator came in, right? Pixelation comes in. Pixelations. Okay, and then you see it form in a hologram. It starts off in this formation. Now, your thoughts, action, emotions goes in pixelation grounds and send in travel, right? Okay, and then what happens, it forms into a shape in a set position, right? And then it comes into its grounds of its hologram. There's the grid, right? So that's the grid that you created, right? This, okay, your thoughts, action, emotions comes into the actual hologram. So you're in that structure of 2 panels, a ceiling, and a ground. Okay, and then you have an open window frame. Okay, and then you get a track communication frame and traction. Right? So it's very powerful what you guys are bringing in now through your simulators. Okay, in your simulation. Okay, so that just gives you a basic grounds of what's going on in that lines. Now the set position locations, hours on setting of sequence, starting line position location of seconds, minutes, and hours in frame. Know exactly if you're 1 hour on the Earth. That's 1 year in space, right? But now your position is outlining setting, no longer inside rotations. So your universal system is coming outside you. It's no longer going to be inside line. It's going to be outside in, right? So what you have to understand in that communication setting to understand the stripping, setting holographic lines of 3D. It's 3D, right? All right, so this is what's going to be happening. 4 slides of setting, process of communications, right? Set position 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 and 12. Set directions. Okay? So it comes automatically into a holographic grid travel. It travels in set locations, right? So the holographic grid correlates the system lines of travel, directing lines of 12 DNA lines, turns your Earth in frequencies and location setting, takes out 3D, cancels outline light and high center interference is zero gravity, 4 signal lines of high center location setting in Earth tones, sending direct locations into your polarities and correlates the system of travel. Okay? All right? Okay. So that's what's going to happen next in travel. You're just coming more of the outside line. And then your Earth travels in platforms of its own system of travel, right? You come into line centers, you start with 0, and then you go into 12 dimension, right? But each hour on the hour equals 0. Equals 0, 0, 0. 3 zeros and 3 settings into 4 flux, all right? That's what's going to happen every hour on the hour. Let's bring it in sequence here. So you got to recognize your codification setting, your 7-track center location setting, your modification lines, your verification codes, screening adaptation lines, course center locations, your 7-track center location setting, and process of communication setting, and configuration system of tracking numbers. That process is communication side lines of system, right? Okay, so there's the hour equals 0. Hour in the hour, right? And that basically substitute the negative into 3 over positive, 3 zeros in tractions slash 4 zeros in setting. Okay? That's the Earth code, your Earth line rotation. The 12 lines of setting in sequence, right? So that's where it's going to be at, right? Every on the hour, it's going to go back to 0 and 3, 3, 3, set lines of settings of 3 zeros slash 4 zeros, right? So that's 7 on measure, 7 in center, and 7 in operation setting and grounds. 3 surface and travel. Okay? So that's tethers and 3 lines of traction, so that's open all signal locations. Ground lines at 3 centers of surface. Okay? And then we get the 3 line settings, and then we cross-reference over lines of pi and direction of the redirect. Okay? Now, the 4 zeros go into the opposite directions in setting a sequence and position of panel, process communication system and calculations, right? Energetic domes, process lines, each line sets course centers and home beacon light and travel into energetic dome, setting travels endpoint lines graph of communication system and travel. Okay? All right, so once we have the 3 lines of measure, scales across lines, we take the line position of 4 zeros above the system of the atmosphere line, and we cross over in 4 signals. 1 in positions of all track location lines, setting process lines of 2, 3, and 4 settings of travel. Okay? So your Earth is basically coming into the outskirts of the inline rotation setting of future adaptation. All right? Travels all at once in setting. Okay, but that's the Earth. Your position is going to be set in tractions. Okay, so every on the hour, it goes back to 0. Okay, and then it substitutes the 3 zeros. Okay, and slash of 4 zeros, puts you in a modification lines into your correlation setting, your location system. Right? So creating that through anomaly sets 4 lines and square roots and 4 track centers in line condition setting to a graph and set position location setting, location to a grid. Okay? So it automatically comes into its pyramid in travel. Okay? Now, once that pyramid comes across line angles, we get at 3 lines of flux, downshift lines anomaly, and 0 line rotation. Process the indication lines over 3 centers, and rotation lines of calculation of spectrum. Now we go with the high line service, high line signals, and outline inline rotation service and traction. Okay? Measures and scales, and set communication. Okay? Travel setting, all together in set position. Right? So your Earth is just becoming more of a hologram now, right? So it's got to go through its 12 line centers. We'll get position of security line, inside rotation, and traction, and line setting, okay? And then we process the blue inside line rotation and travel communication, right? And then we come into all levels, right? So we get sent lines as security. Remember I was telling you about the platitude division locations from high centers, 3 zeros lines and 4 zeros in travel, puts lines of 7 configuration system and set travel in position, location, measure, and scale. Well, it gets more complicated when you get into coloration lines of pattern, right? So it gets into 12 line centers and it comes in its own volume, its own mass. So the Earth itself becomes identity of itself that governs its own space and governs its own time. So you really, really have to get control of mind control with your systems more than ever. Observe what's going on, but see it as its own formation. And when you get in control of your mind line system, you basically are surrendering and submitting, okay, in that position. When you're surrendering, okay, you're basically putting yourself in consciousness, and now you're connecting, and you want to get control. You want to understand that current of its flow. You want to understand the facade of the face. You want to have an ongoing conversation with its intelligence on an ongoing basis, because now we're in the future adaptation of the universal stream of content. And the more you get in that position, the more you get balance of what you're doing and travel. All right? It's all the mind control. All right, so setting lines of sequence, 3 ground centers of surface, process lines, indication lines of red, over lines of 3 centers, 2 travels and point communications, indicates 3 grounds. And then we cross the angles of 3 centers of zeros in rotation, surface, and travel. Okay, and then we go into the blue. Now the blue has a plasma line, plasmasium force line communication, plasmanian walls. Line course sends a thermal into 1 graph lines, 1/3, 1 track, 1 division location, X-ray Zulu. Direct lines into Foxtrot, directing ground centers of uniform. Position lines that pop out, reset, retraction, redivision, relocation, setting, process, calculate lines. 3 weather patterns, process lines of 3 centers, communication setting of 4 lines, communication lines of question. Sets lines, calculation, screen adaptation. All right? So the blue line, offline signals into 4 lines of measure and scale of communications. All right? Okay, so then we ground shift anomalies and settings. Then we bring the orange in. Orange is lines into creative cycles, course center lines of travel, directing calculations. 3 Fibonacci's of settings of swirls. All the orange information lines of grounds and high lines of surface and traction. Okay, travels all together in set position. Right? And then we do the same thing again above the line signal. Right? Except this time we change the perimeters. We understand how to change perimeters on future seconds, minutes, and hours now. So every hour, change the hour in settings. And the more you get balanced with your systems, the more you understand the energetic graphs, circuits, and understand how to use that in modulation setting to your own system and travel. Okay? And then you cross angles. Okay? So you're creating a holographic grid through a simulator. Okay? That's basically what it is. Like a green screen. Right? But you have to process the indication setting, what you're doing from inside, outside line communications. It's the setting locations, right? Changing the schematics, changing the rotations, changing the spin, changing the simulators in set travel. Always, always in set traction. Gets more complicated when you get in gridding, right? Holographic gridding, pixelation gridding, TV gridding, communication gridding, CPU gridding, travels endpoint lines graphs of structured communication. The simulation. Okay, in set tractions. Very powerful stuff. Okay. All right. Open window. Boom. Right? Connect to this. Same color. The blinds are the same color. Look. See? The blinds are the same color. See? See the angle? See how it's communicating? See? Same color, guys. Look at the color. Look at the color. Look at the color. Color's the same. Look at the open window. Communication right there. Boom. Okay? You see how powerful that is? Did I get in position of confusion? Did I set anything in location to its system? What do we see in settings? Inside tractions, right? Outside line position. Right? But look at that. Same color. Same color as this. And there's the window. And center tractions. Booyah. See what I mean? Everything is communicating with you. That's how powerful it is. Same color. Okay? Very powerful stuff. Okay? So it records everything you set positions of. Whoa, look at that. Oh. Wow. Isn't that amazing? Change it on different angles and set tractions. Right? Look. Look at the patterns. It's changed. See? It changed its color. See? Changed its color. It's gray and white. All through this. Pay attention, people. So that's what it is, all through simulation. Okay? But I'm just showing you how we're communicating with everything. Everything's communicating with us. It's absolutely incredible when you just let your mind go and don't think about anything. You process everything of the mind and set tractions, all set position, location to a system. All through settings, guys. Okay? Stop trying to figure things out. You know, and that position, location to a system. Okay? Right, look. See that? See that there? See that there? See? See? You see that there? Right? That is this. Everything's communicating with you. And the more you understand that, the more it gets easier in travel. But all you're doing is observing everything that you're seeing. So you're just looking at everything. But if you want to get particular, you've got to perceive consciousness now. And when you're breaking things down, you're breaking things in position of what you want to bring in, step by step. You don't bring 40,000 versions of everything else that's communicating with you all in once. Because it confuses your anomalies where you are on your mind, adaptation, setting, location of your space and time through your alteration system, puts all lines of confusion through your alignments, or where you guys are in time. Okay? So it's processing the communication setting, how everything is always communicating with you, right? All right, so you're in the center operation. This is you. That's you, right? Okay. So when you're looking in all direction. All right. So you get a direction here, you get a direction here, and you get a direction here. You're looking at 3 settings in travel. 3 different locations, right? It's traveling though, right? See how it's driving by itself, right? But it needs a ground. It needs panels, it needs a ceiling. So it can travel through its system location of travel. Okay? So it can travel anywhere it wants in set position. All right? So once you understand the grounds, once you understand the panels, once you understand the atmospheres, and once you understand the highways, everything comes in balance of communication. And again, it's also traveling again, right? Setting platforms of communication, setting to travel, right? And then you have your position locations of your Earth. Your Earth is just a hologram. Okay, so you're in empty space and setting to travel, right? So this is what is in set positions, right? You're setting lines of 4 sequence, lines of panel. Here, let's setting sequence of panel communications. All right, let's direct lines and communication here and here. Okay? And you're here, floating in space. Right? So this is empty space, this is empty space, this is empty space, this is empty space. Everything's empty space. It's just you, nobody else. But you're traveling. See? Nothing's coming in. Right? So when you're perceiving things, here's the lamp. There's the lamp. Okay, you bring in the lamp. Right? You're just bringing one thing at a time, right? It's connected to you. You're connecting to the lamp and setting traction, right? Now you're communicating travel. All right? Now you're bringing in your chair, the chair you're sitting on. Okay? And then you travel through it. One step at a time, right? Then you want to bring in your Merkaba, tesseract, and tetrahedron. There you go. Boom. Grounds, powers, atmospheres. Okay? Now when you bring that position, then you can bring in the platforms. Platitude, set lines, communication system, all through travel. 4 settings of communications. Travel all together. Okay? And then you bring your walk-in forms. Setting lines of communications, downshift lines, nominal line, cross line, angles, high position location settings, all through track location. It all travels all together. Okay, see, it travels all together. All right, very powerful stuff, guys. So that's basically what it is. Okay, you're not perceiving through consciousness. You're just in the mind of empty space, and you're just looking around. And you're seeing everything that's operating its own governed with its own system, which is its own online settings, right? Everything is alive, right? So we just have to identify and how to see it. Is to see things that go beyond the measure and scale of balance. How to modify that is through saying how to code that. And when you're coding everything, everything comes in balance of sequence and set lines of travel, right? But it's very powerful. Anything you see in position, you see it travel. See, it's traveling by itself, right? I'm showing you what it can do, right? I'm moving it, right? But it can move itself. You know, that's what you have to understand. That's how you mind control your systems. Your mind controlling you, your mind controlling everything around you, but you're bringing in step-by-step procedure. There's certain things that you bring in, but you got to break it down and codify it. And if you don't codify, you allow yourself to put yourself inside locations of what you're not in your universal system of streaming. Okay? Understand the content, knowing exactly how to come into the seconds, minutes, and hours in frame. So here on the earth, okay, in setting attraction, right? Okay? So set position of 1 second, okay? Traveled you in position line centers, okay? Into, you can change 1 second time sequence lines into 5 minutes. Okay, so that correlates the system and travel, direct and redirect, direct and redirect. So you're going faster and faster in frequencies and future adaptation of seconds, minutes, and hours now. And travel, right? And it travels all together. So it sets up the platform of communication, the road. Okay, you set up the road, you set up the platforms and set lines of travel in that communication system, right? And again, it travels, see? Okay, and then you set up the structure of the buildings. There's the one building there, travels, right? All together. And then you bring it over line, cross line, and there's another building in set position, all right? And then you set up another building in the opposite setting locations. You set in your holographic city and travel. Now it's all traveling all together. They all travel all together, right? So it's about understanding what you're doing in travel communications. Okay, it's a lot of fun if you just let your mind go and travel itself, right? Right. Once you get in your holographic city, it gets much easier how to travel yourself and all communications in your system through your calculation modified. It direct lines the calculations how you communicate your system all through travel, knowing exactly how to use the grounds, use the powers, the atmospheres, and your highways in 4 settings. Okay, a plan for communications. Okay? That's where you come in your Merkaba test or contextual region. But in that position, you're just floating in space, just looking at everything of its observation. That's all it is. Empty space, empty space, empty space. All right? And that basically you get in lines of communication through settings, right? That's all empty space, right? So you got inner space and you got outer space. Okay, outer space is a 4-line window. Inner space is a 3-line window. Okay, sets track lines of 3 centers and travel communications, right? Then you have your platforms inside travel, endpoint lines, graph, and center operation lines of sequence. Okay, and then you got your communication setting to your energetic dome. Okay, and that communications, and then you have your platforms going forward in travel, a future adaptation, right? Future 1, future 2, future 3, and seconds, minutes, and hours, right? So you're crossing seconds into minutes, and now you're at hours in frame. Okay, so your position locations, you're talking on a planet in sequence into 1-year setting in frame communications, right? So there's so many things that you can do once you understand how to travel all together. So what you're doing is you're synchronizing everything, and everything's synchronizing with you, right? So again, you're in the center operation of nothing, of empty space, right? But you're tethered to everything. You're just walking into the room, and then you're all connected through an electrical cord, which is a laser cord in settings, right? That's what you have to identify. Everything's spinning, right? And everything's spinning in the same direction. So when you get at positions of here, okay, object here, object here, object here, they all go in the same directions of you. They go in the same direction, see? They go in the same direction of you. Okay? Very powerful. How you're connected to everything and everything's connected to you, right? So once you understand that, then you go faster. Then you come into all lines of your solar system and travel. Okay, then you really go fast. Okay? And then you're putting all communication setting of consciousness of its awareness in that position location system of the calculations. Communicating with everything and everything communicating with you in seconds, minutes, and hours of future adaptation, right? Then you basically turn it into a teleportation pod or a satellite. You could change communication lines of time frame in that position. There's the pod, there's the teleportation travel. Now you're traveling through it, right? And you're inside operating it in the center operation of you in set calculations. You're always in the center. You never leave the center. So all you're doing is bringing things in frequency. Right? So I don't want to get anybody confused. So if you're not perceiving anything in consciousness, you're looking at everything else that's governed its own space. But if you want to get mind control and how to identify what you're seeing, now you got to surrender and submit to everything around you and communicate with it through its consciousness and connect with its frequency, is to connect with its vibration, its harmonics, and its prasades. You have to connect. And once you connect, they connect with you. Okay? So once you connect with each other, you work with each other, you go in the same directions of set positions. Okay? You're like this, right? Going like that, right? It's going around. See? It's all together. Right? So planet here, planet here, planet here, planet here, planet here. It's all together, going together. See, it's all together, right? But you think if you don't link your system, you're lost in transaction, right? So you don't have the communication. Remember I told you about the box? Well, that's what happens if you're not connecting, right? It separates. It spins on its own system, but it's not connected to you. You understand? You just have to identify you're always connected to everything. What offlines your position is as soon as you get in motion. Once you get in motion, you're separating yourself with tether that you're already attached to, right? But it's all connected to laser. And laser is red. It's a red grid. Red, blue, white, all different colors depending where you are in transitions, right? So the red comes in, there. Now you're connected. Now you're traveling in the same direction all together at once, right? And if you want to communicate with each other through a box frame, a window frame, in a constant continuous flow, there you go. Now you're connecting with each other. Now you're talking to each other in the same flow, right? So, and if you add questions in that settings, if you want to bring another planet in, well, you have to understand how to bring it in a tether in all four communications so they can all communicate with you all at once. Now they're all connecting to each other. Having ongoing conversations of future seconds, minutes, and hours. Everything's happening all at once, guys, see? Everything's happening all at once. Okay? And it doesn't matter how you see it on different levels of communications. But it's all connected in the same direction, the same locations. Ongoing conversation, right? So you're in the same line. You're in the same telephone line, but you're communicating. It's like three-way call. But there's no stopping procedure, location setting. There's nothing to get in positions of. You're just having ongoing conversations. With the phone, with the lamp, with your computers, with the desk, with the doors, everything you get in positions of, right? But not everything is going to be in track location in your system. Some are going to be in position, some are not going to be in, some are just going to be on their own system. But when you cross their path, yes, you have to communicate, right? So this is bypassing. If you're here and you're in your structure and setting line communications, you're here, right? Okay. And let's say you come across a set lines of a position location of a tree. Here's the tree, right? Okay, and you basically go around the tree. Okay, you go around the tree in setting locations, right? Now, what you've already done is trespassing. You did not So it's about offline position here, see? Off, one's going this way, the tree's going the other way. See? You're going in the opposite direction, the tree's going in the direction where it's going, right? So you're not in position until you understand how to scan the tree itself. When you scan the tree itself, you put your fields up, it puts its fields up, right? And then you communicate with each other. Now you're in balance with each other. Okay? That's what it is. So you can't bypass anything. It's like, hey, you're not going to say hi? It's rude, right? To say that. You know, it's about understanding that you're just addressing everything. You don't have to connect with everything. But when they're trying to connect with you, your body's going to get pinged, right? It's going to be a vibration frequency. So like when your ears ring, right? That's coming from space, you know, from inside your system. It's coming from your avatar. That's coming from intelligence inside your room. That's coming from intelligence outside your room. But you have to process this now. It's much easier for you to identify that, right? Because now we're in the future, seconds, minutes, and hours now. Everything happening all at once. We're in the universal stream of content. And the more you come into your quantifies, the more you come in your quantum self. And the more you can identify everything around you is nothing but a question. And when you get at a question, you stop questioning yourselves. Okay? And then you just start spinning around the system in tractions in the same direction. You work together as a team. See? You work together as a team. And it doesn't matter where you get your positions of a travel. Okay? Very powerful stuff in travel communications, right? But that's one thing you guys have to identify. Okay? To really understand how this all works in your set positions and the settings now. Okay? Because the future's always been here. But what you have to start identifying now is the clocking. Know exactly what's going on with your seconds, minutes, and hours. And each hour on the hour is going to go back to zero until you balance out your thoughts, your action, emotions, and understand you're creating a simulator. And when you're creating a simulator, you're not just creating intelligence, you're creating a map. Okay? And you have to be specific in travel communications and settings. Hold on a second.
Estoy haciendo mi reporte. ¿Se le ofrece algo de su habitación? Luego paso. Gracias.
Okay, so hopefully that, guys, helps you out in a lot of ways and forms for you guys to identify that, how real it is when you start to recognize everything around you. Okay, is more real than ever. All right, it's always been in its super consciousness. Now you just have to identify yourself, is to come to yourself now. And the way you do that is to code your systems and all levels of your travels. This is going to help you and guide you how to understand how to use it through your clockings, your foundations, your timelines, your alter states where you are in lines of screen adaptation with system. Try to process that. Try to get into mind control of everything you see. Know exactly what you're saying to yourself and how you're saying these things to yourself. It's all lines of provision. Okay? Because we're now in the future. Okay? And that lines of all levels of existing all at once in a constant continuous flow. The constant continuous flow is everything happening all at once. So whatever you're doing, you're putting yourself there. Okay? So you're doing it through a schematic. You're doing it through a drawing. Okay? You're doing it through your system inside. You're creating a simulator. Okay? You're creating a structure. You're creating a map. You're creating coordinates. You're creating longitude and latitude of space of itself. Okay? So the team has to really get specific in how they want to identify that settings. They have to break these things down and that position, how they want to speak and who they're speaking to, and then what do they want to get into it in position, location, to its systems, all through travel. Okay? The more you modify that and the more you codify your binaries and your algorithms and your codings and location encryptions, life gets a lot more easier in balance of communications. All right? Adios.